Ethan's ship shuddered violently as it cut through the planet's thin atmosphere. Sparks flew from the damaged hull, and alarms blared in his ears. He gritted his teeth and pulled the controls, but nothing worked the way it should. With a final crash, the vessel tumbled across a rocky plain, finally skidding to a stop near the edge of a dark canyon. Smoke rose from the engine. The silence that followed felt heavy and endless. He unstrapped himself and crawled out of the wreckage, dust and ash clinging to his uniform. The sky above was a strange mix of orange and gray, and jagged rocks jutted from the ground like teeth. Ethan knew he was far from anywhere familiar. Alone, he had to survive. His first priority was food and water. The planet's surface was harsh, and he had only a small pack of rations left. He moved carefully, scanning the area for any sign of life or danger. Hours passed, and the sun began to sink behind the mountains, casting long shadows across the barren land. Then he saw them. A figure emerged from a narrow canyon, moving cautiously. Ethan froze. At first, he thought it was a mirage, but then a smaller figure appeared beside the first. It was a mother and a child, their skin a pale, shimmering green. Their eyes were large and dark, reflecting the fading light. They wore tattered clothing and carried rudimentary tools. Their movements were careful, almost desperate. Ethan lowered his hands and stepped forward slowly. "Hello," he said in his own language, unsure if they could understand. The mother, Lyra, stiffened. She stepped in front of the child, shielding her. Her eyes studied him carefully, calculating. She had seen strangers, before travelers, raiders, and worse, but this one moved differently. There was no weapon drawn, no aggression, only cautious steps and open hands. Ethan noticed their injuries. Lyra's arm was bruised and scratched, and the child, Neva, had a small cut on her leg. He reached into his pack and pulled out a small packet of rations. "Food," he said, holding it out. Lyra shook her head. She did not trust him. She took a small step back and whispered something in her language. Neva peeked from behind her mother, her eyes wide and curious. Ethan smiled softly, kneeling on one knee to appear less threatening. He tore the ration in half and placed it on a flat rock near them. Then he moved back slowly, giving them space. Minutes passed like hours. The wind howled across the rocks, carrying dust and dry leaves. Finally, Neva took a tentative step forward, her small hand reaching for the food. Lyra hesitated, then slowly lowered herself to her daughter's level. She spoke softly, a melodic sound that Ethan could not understand. But the tone seemed gentle. Neva took the food and glanced at Ethan. He nodded encouragingly. She bit into the ration, her eyes lighting up with relief. Lyra remained cautious, but she did not move away. Night fell quickly on the planet. Ethan had set up a small camp near the canyon entrance, using debris from his ship and rocks to make a simple shelter. He kept a fire low, not wanting to frighten the aliens, but warm enough to keep himself comfortable. Lyra and Neva stayed hidden, watching from a distance. Ethan did not try to force contact. Instead, he quietly ate, cleaned his wounds, and tended to his small supplies. The storm came suddenly. Wind whipped across the canyon, carrying sharp dust that stung the skin. Ethan moved quickly, securing his shelter. In the distance, he heard the faint cries of the aliens. Without thinking, he ran toward them. Lyra was trying to shield Neva from the biting wind, but they were struggling. Ethan threw a blanket over them both and helped them find cover behind a rock formation. He worked quickly, holding Neva close to keep her warm and using his jacket to protect Lyra. The storm was harsh, but together they survived the night. By morning, the sky had cleared. Lyra looked at Ethan differently now. There was no fear, only cautious acknowledgement. Neva smiled shyly, a small, bright expression that warmed Ethan's heart. For the first time, the three of them sat together, sharing a quiet meal. Ethan tried speaking again. "I'm Ethan," he said, pointing to himself. Then he pointed to them. "You?" Lyra hesitated, then said a word softly. Ethan repeated it carefully, even though he did not understand the meaning. Neva giggled, clapping her small hands. It was a beginning. The days passed, and Ethan remained nearby, helping them find water and edible plants. He repaired a broken tool and taught Lyra how to make a small trap for small animals. They began to trust him more, though Lyra always stayed protective of Neva. Ethan understood the bond between mother and child, and he respected it. One afternoon, while exploring a nearby ridge, Ethan found more food hidden under the rocks. He brought it back and laid it out. Neva ran forward first, gathering the fruits and small plants. Lyra followed, her movements careful but appreciative. Ethan watched them, a feeling of warmth spreading in his chest. He had come to this planet alone, expecting hardship and danger, but he had found something unexpected: companionship. That night, they sat together near the fire. Ethan carefully passed Neva a piece of cooked root, and she accepted it eagerly. Lyra spoke softly, pointing to the stars above. Ethan looked up and saw the distant planets and moons shining. He realized that although he was a stranger here, he was no longer alone. For the first time since his crash, Ethan felt hope. He did not know what the future held, but he knew that he would protect this mother and daughter, as they had begun to trust him. Somehow in the vastness of a foreign world, a bond was forming, one that could grow into something stronger than fear or survival. And as the fire crackled, casting warm light across the rocks, Ethan realized he was not just feeding strangers. He was beginning to build a family. The next morning, the planet seemed less hostile. The sun rose in soft shades of orange and gold, casting light over the rocky plains. Ethan packed some of his supplies and made his way to the small canyon where Lyra and Neva had hidden. He had slept only a few hours, but he felt a strange energy in the air, sensed that things could change. Lyra was waiting, sitting on a flat stone while Neva played nearby with small pebbles. When she saw Ethan, she stood carefully, not moving too quickly. Her eyes held a mixture of caution and curiosity. Ethan smiled gently and pointed to the plants he had collected. "Food," he said. He gestured for them to come closer. Lyra hesitated for a moment, but then walked toward him. Neva followed, running a few steps and then stopping shyly. Ethan laid out the plants and a few cooked roots. Lyra examined them with careful hands, touching and smelling each piece. Then she took one and tasted it. Neva copied her, eating with a small smile. For the first time, Ethan tried to speak in small words he thought might help. "Water?" he asked, pointing to the stream nearby. Lyra nodded, and together they led him to a shallow pool. Neva laughed as she splashed her hands in the cool water. Ethan joined her, and for a few moments, the tension of the previous days melted away as they returned to their shelter. Ethan noticed Lyra's eyes, studying him closely. He realized she was trying to understand him and perhaps decide if he could be trusted fully. He didn't rush her. Instead, he offered small acts of kindness, straightening the shelter walls, cleaning some broken tools, and carefully arranging the food. Lyra watched silently, and Neva helped in her own playful way. Passing small stones and sticks to Ethan, the days turned into a routine. Ethan would explore nearby areas, gathering food, water, and anything useful for their shelter. He taught Lyra how to make small snares to catch food and how to store water safely. Neva learned quickly, mimicking his movements and asking questions with curious eyes and simple sounds. One afternoon, while exploring a rocky ridge, Ethan heard a strange sound, a low growl. He turned quickly and saw two predators approaching, their bodies long and sleek, with sharp claws glinting in the sunlight. He froze, then remembered the mother and daughter. He ran back to the shelter, finding Lyra holding Neva close, both frozen in fear. Ethan didn't hesitate. He grabbed a few rocks and small sticks, tossing them near the predators to distract them. They growled, but paused, confused. Using quick thinking, Ethan led them toward a narrow canyon, where the rocks made it hard for the predators to chase. The danger passed, and he returned to the mother and daughter. Lyra's eyes were wide with relief. She spoke softly in her language, her tone different this time, less fear, more gratitude. Neva clung to Ethan's leg, her small hands holding tightly. For the first time, Ethan felt that he was truly part of their lives, not just a helper from the outside. That evening, they sat together near the fire. Ethan passed Neva a cooked root, and she accepted it eagerly, smiling. Lyra stayed close, keeping her protective gaze on both of them. Ethan noticed the bond growing stronger. Actions, care, and shared experiences were becoming a language of their own. A few days later, Lyra allowed Ethan to help repair a broken water container. He worked carefully, showing her how to fix it step by step. She watched and then tried herself, following his instructions. Neva helped by holding small tools, her tiny hands steady and eager. By the end, the container was fixed, and they all shared a quiet smile of accomplishment. The alien mother began to speak more often, using gestures and broken words that Ethan could slowly understand. She showed him small details of their life, the way they hid from danger, the plants they collected, and the ways they cared for each other. Ethan listened, asking questions with gestures and expressions. Though the language was different, the meaning became clear. One night, as they sat under the twin moons of the planet, Neva asked Ethan to tell a story. He laughed softly, unsure if she would understand, but he tried. He spoke of Earth, of forests and rivers, of skies and stars. Neva's eyes grew wide with wonder, and Lyra's expression softened. They had never heard stories like this before. For a few hours, they were no longer a mother and child. Surviving alone, they were a family. Sharing imagination and dreams, the real test of their bond came a week later. A violent storm approached, faster and harsher than any before. Wind tore across the rocks, carrying dust and debris. Ethan moved quickly to secure their shelter, tying loose parts and reinforcing weak spots. Lyra and Neva stayed close, following his lead without hesitation. Together, they moved as a team, each action precise and deliberate. When the storm hit, it was fierce. The wind howled, and rain mixed with dust stung their skin. Ethan held Neva close, covering her with his jacket. Lyra sheltered them both, leaning against Ethan for stability. The storm raged for hours, but for the first time, none of them felt helpless. They had each other, and that made them strong. When the storm passed, the sky cleared, and the morning sun shone brightly. Ethan, exhausted but unharmed, looked at Lyra and Neva. Their eyes met his, and he saw trust, gratitude, and something more: love. It was a bond that had grown from small gestures of care, from shared meals, from protection and guidance. They were no longer strangers. Neva ran forward and hugged him tightly, whispering a small word in her language. Ethan smiled, lifting her gently and spinning her around. Lyra placed a hand on his shoulder, nodding slowly. She had accepted him. He was no longer an outsider. He had become part of their family. As they prepared another meal together, Ethan realized that this planet, once hostile and lonely, has given him something unexpected. A mother and daughter, survivors like him, had opened their hearts, and in doing so, they had made him family. For the first time since the crash, Ethan felt at peace. He had come to this world alone, uncertain and afraid. But now, with Lyra and Neva, he knew he was not alone. Together, they would face whatever challenges the planet had in store. Together, they were stronger. Together, they were family. The days grew longer, and the bond between Ethan, Lyra, and Neva became stronger with each passing moment. They had learned to move together, to understand each other's needs, to rely on one another in ways that no words could fully explain. Life on the harsh planet was still a challenge, but the sense of family made every hardship easier to bear. One morning, Ethan woke early and stepped outside their small shelter. The sun rose over the jagged rocks, casting a golden glow across the plain. He spotted Neva already playing near a cluster of rocks, and Lyra gathering edible plants nearby. Ethan smiled. This scene, ordinary yet full of life, felt like home. He joined them, carrying a basket of fruits he had found the previous day. "Breakfast," he said, holding it out. Neva ran forward and helped him distribute the food, giggling as she balanced small fruits in her hands. Lyra nodded in appreciation, her eyes softening as she took a piece and tasted it. For Ethan, moments like these were more valuable than any discovery he had made on his travels. As they ate, Ethan noticed dark clouds forming on the horizon. The winds began to pick up, and the smell of rain mixed with dust filled the air. He sensed danger. The planet was unpredictable, and storms here could become life-threatening in minutes. He called out to Lyra, pointing to the sky and making urgent gestures. She understood immediately. Together, they quickly gathered their supplies and reinforced the shelter. Neva, small but determined, carried lightweight items and helped place them where Ethan instructed. The storm hit harder than any before. Fierce wind tore across the rocks, whipping dust into their faces and blinding them at times. Rain came in sheets, cold and sharp, and the small shelter groaned under the force. Ethan held Neva close, shielding her with his body. Lyra clung to both of them, her protective presence a constant reassurance. They moved as one, adjusting the shelter and keeping each other safe. Hours passed in tense silence. Ethan could feel Neva trembling against him, but he whispered softly, telling her that everything would be all right. He could see Lyra's face, determined yet anxious, trusting him completely. In that moment, it was clear they were no longer just survivors together. They were a family. Finally, the storm began to subside. The wind lessened, and the rain turned to a gentle drizzle. Ethan carefully stepped outside, checking the surrounding area for damage. Lyra and Neva followed, each of them exhausted but unharmed. Their shelter had survived, and their supplies were mostly intact. Relief washed over all three of them. Ethan smiled at Lyra, who returned the gesture, a silent acknowledgement of trust and gratitude. Neva ran forward, picking up small stones and throwing them at Ethan playfully. He laughed and joined her, tossing stones back gently. For a few precious moments, the world outside the storm ceased to exist. They were safe, together, and that was enough. In the days that followed, they worked to repair and strengthen their shelter. Ethan taught Lyra how to build stronger supports using rocks and leftover metal from his ship. Neva helped eagerly, learning quickly and asking questions in her soft, melodic voice. Ethan responded with patience, showing her how small actions could make a big difference. One afternoon, while exploring a nearby ridge, Ethan noticed something unusual: a small grove of fruit-bearing plants, hidden from plain sight. He hurried back to share the discovery with Lyra and Neva. Their eyes widened with excitement as they saw the abundance of food. For the first time since their exile, they had enough to eat without worry. That evening they celebrated quietly, sitting near the fire with a warm meal. Ethan passed food to Neva, who laughed and accepted it eagerly. Lyra sat close, her hand brushing Ethan's briefly, a gesture of acknowledgement and connection. They shared a moment of contentment, knowing that despite the harsh world around them, they had created a small haven of safety and love. The bond between them grew stronger with every day. Lyra shared stories of their past, of the colony they had been exiled from, and the hardships they had faced. Ethan listened carefully, nodding and showing empathy. Neva shared her own small stories through gestures and playful sounds, making Ethan laugh and bringing a sense of joy that had been missing since his crash. Then came the day of the final test. A massive storm, larger and more violent than any before, approached from the horizon. Ethan could feel the tremor in the ground and see the dark clouds rolling in quickly. He knew this was no ordinary storm. It could destroy everything they had built if they were not prepared. He quickly gathered Lyra and Neva together, he said, gesturing to the shelter and to each other. They understood immediately. The three of them worked in perfect coordination, reinforcing walls, securing supplies, and making sure Neva was safe at all times. The storm hit with incredible force, shaking the ground and howling across the plains. Rain, wind, and dust battered their shelter, but they stayed close, relying on each other. Hours passed. Exhaustion weighed heavily on all of them. Ethan held Neva tightly, whispering comfort. Lyra stayed close, guiding him and helping where she could. They had faced storms before, but this was the ultimate test of their strength, their courage, and their unity. When the storm finally passed, the world was quiet. The sun broke through the clouds, casting golden light across the plains. Ethan looked at Lyra and Neva, both tired but safe. Relief and pride filled his chest. They had survived together. They had protected each other. Neva ran forward and hugged Ethan tightly, whispering a small word in her language. Ethan lifted her gently, spinning her around with laughter and joy. Lyra placed a hand on his shoulder, smiling softly. The bond between them was complete. He was no longer a stranger. He was part of their family. They sat together near the fire, sharing a meal in the calm after the storm. Ethan reflected on their journey, the crash, the first encounters, the storms, and the trust that had grown between them. He realized that the greatest discovery on this planet was not food, water, or shelter. It was the connection they had built, the family they had created from strangers, as the twin moons rose in the sky. Casting silver light across the rocks, Ethan, Lyra, and Neva sat together in quiet contentment. The planet around them was still harsh and wild, but they no longer faced it alone. They had each other. They had trust, love, and family. And in that moment, Ethan knew that no matter what challenges lay ahead, they would face them together. For the first time since his crash, Ethan felt truly at home. The alien mother and daughter, once strangers, had made him part of their lives. They had made him family. And that was more precious than anything he could have imagined.